Hello everybody and welcome back to another video here on my channel. In today's video, I am going over all the books that I rated as 5 stars, all my past 5-star reads over the course of potentially 6 years or so. It's mainly been since I actually started my YouTube around 2019. I think is when I first started kind of doing a little bit of book reviews. I honestly didn't post that much book stuff back then, but I did get into BookTube a lot, and that is when I started actually using a star rating system instead of just, oh, I like this book or I didn't like this book. So these are all the books that I rated 5 stars, not in any order at all, but just books that I loved. And even now looking back, there's one that I decided not to actually include that I rated 5 stars a couple years ago, I think like 2020, but I'm not going to include just because I'm kind of embarrassed that I rated it that high. It definitely does not deserve it in my mind now. As I mature, I kind of look through all these books and some of my opinions have changed just slightly, but only one that I've truly decided it cannot be in this list. But I'm so excited to sit here and go over all of these books. I'm pretty sure we have more than 20, maybe around 25. I just counted, we have about 23 books that I'm going to be going over in this video. Without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into my 5-star reads. The very first one I'm going to go over is actually Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. This was my first fully Agatha Christie book because I would start some of these books that I had when I was younger and I just never finished them. So this is my first official finished book by her that I read, and I actually loved it. This was the original, you know, you get this invitation to come to an island and everybody just starts dropping like flies and you have to figure out who the murderer is, and it's just a mystery that kind of messes with you all the way up till the entire last page, and you're still thinking you know who maybe the murderer is or who killed all these people, and then all of a sudden it's like, hold up, we're reading the last paragraph and you found out that the person you might have thought who is maybe the only person living is actually not the killer. And I absolutely loved how I felt while reading this. I liked the copy I had. I felt like I flew through this book a little bit. I might have read it for a video in like 2020 or 2021. I had no complaints about it and I still think that this is a 5-star read. Next, I'm going to talk about the only book I actually don't currently own a physical copy of anymore. It was around the size of the Agatha Christie book and I got rid of it. I found it for free and then I just turned around, and I think I got rid of it for my birthday potentially or for my free little library video, and it's actually Cell by Stephen King. I actually really enjoyed this book for the most part. The copy I had I didn't like because it was a mass market paperback, but at the same time I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was just kind of crazy because I think on page like 6 we hop in and there's just something that happens to an animal that instantly I'm like, hold up, we just started this book, why is this already happening now? But at the same time it was like a lot of the book I was imagining as a movie in a way, not fully, but some clips of it. I had a really good time reading it. I ended up watching the movie with my husband afterwards. I convinced him to watch it. That was a total flop, I'm not gonna lie. I do not recommend the movie. I do recommend Cell by Stephen King, but looking back, besides kind of how I felt at the time, it's not necessarily a 5-star read anymore for me. I'd say it's maybe like a 4.5. Yeah, definitely a 4.5 because of how I felt while reading it. Next I have Sarah's Key by Tatiana D. Rosne. I have never seen this movie yet. I will eventually try and watch this, but I have never gotten around to it. This book though, I absolutely loved. I still think this is a 5-star book. It really kind of tore at my heart just a little bit because it made me physically sick, because I think our son was only about 6 months old at the time when I read this book, and the thing that happens in this book broke me. It honestly just tore at my heart because I was just imagining our sweet little baby in this situation, which is terrible. But at the same time, I love historical fiction and I love books and stuff revolving around wars or military style books, and this didn't necessarily have the same concept except for it is about Paris during the war. So the very back, for the 1942 timeline, that is, because I forgot it was dual timeline. For the 1942, it says Sarah, a 10-year-old girl, is taken with her parents by the French police as they go door to door arresting Jewish families in the middle of the night. I will say this book for the 42 timeline was a 5-star read. There is another character, her name, I think it's actually Julia. Yeah, of course it's my name. And it's also 60 years later. It's dual timeline POV as well, and I hated that timeline. I'm not gonna lie, I did not care about that timeline because I felt like in a way, I mean, it had a good relevance to it. The little bit of plot with that timeline was okay because it did connect to the 1942, but at the same time I felt like we were just going over this woman and having a divorce or something along the lines like that, and it was so annoying to me. But other than that, I still think this book, especially the war story, was a 5-star read and it really stuck with me, and I hope to see the movie sometime soon. I absolutely love this book. This is The Legend of Storey County by Brock Theone, I do believe, and this edition I have, I absolutely love mine just a little bit more. I thrifted this so many years ago and I decided to read it. First off, the font is so big, but I love how it looks. I love how it's bold and I like the head heading. I just think all of this book was so good. I watched this as a movie. It's basically like a slave. You kind of go back and hear his story. This is how I describe the book, but everything on this cover, every picture displays how I felt and how I was watching a movie as I was reading this. The cover goes along with the story so good, and when things were happening in this book, when I was reading about the events, I would flip to the front of the cover and match that event with each picture because there's multiple different versions. And this whole thing, I've been thinking about maybe I should reread it because I had such a fun time reading this, and I love the adventure. I love how I felt while reading it. I loved the character. I thought it was all so interesting and so intriguing. And I think even now, with having so many years in between reading this book, and maybe if I ever reread it, I think I would still find it a 5-star read. Also, two things. One, it's like a beautiful cover. I love it. And then secondly, it's a book that I thrifted that I never heard anything about, so I went into it completely blind, and it made it so much better. I already talked about this author. You already know, since my favorite movie of all time is Christine, that I had to pick up Stephen King's Christine and also read that. I actually watched the movie, I think when I was like 8. I never even knew about this book, to be honest. I knew my mom had the book because my mom used to always get from his website that he used to have all of those books monthly in the mail or every week or something like that. So she has a lot of his books, especially a lot of first editions. And because of that, she actually gave me this version. This is the one that I actually read, and I still want to keep this book because I still love it. This is my only book I have duplicates of. I just wanted a bigger version that I could reread if I ever wanted to, since it's one of my favorite books. Just because this one's kind of older, the glue is starting to kind of tear apart, and I don't want to ruin it any more than it is. But I do have this version, which is just a smaller edition. I don't think this one is the first print, but she has the actual hardcover ones. No, this one is like a 17th print, so it's not a nice one, and that's one reason she gave it to me. And when I read it, I absolutely loved Christine. I'm still obsessed with this movie. I mean, the movie compared to the book, they're completely two different stories. There's a lot of things like the ending that's different. Something really relevant to Christine does not happen, unlike the movie. I just found this so good. I loved reading the book a little bit more because it explains so much more for the ending. It makes a lot of sense, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't care if something bad happens at the end of both the movie and the book. I am still going to say that my truck is my Christine because of some things that has happened with her and me, and also like other people, and also because of the bond. And at first, the way that nobody wanted this Plymouth Fury, everybody said it was like trash, let's just say. It wasn't good, it was a waste of money. That's exactly me with my truck. I fell in love with my truck. Arnie fell in love with Christine. He built her, I've built her. Christine protects Arnie. My truck kind of protects me. She also never abandons me. And you know what? That's the part that's me in my truck. But honestly, I love Christine. This is still a 5-star. This is my favorite movie. The book was good. There's, of course, with Stephen King, some terrible, like, raunchy things or just, I don't know, weird things. But out of all the books that I've read so far from him, this is the most clean and normal book. But it was just still so good. Next, I have Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I feel like a lot of you guys have already read this book or know about it. And also, of course, maybe you even rated it 5 stars. I said when I did my reading vlogs that I technically love Legendary more than this. I rated Legendary 4.5 stars. This actually 5 stars. This was the first book in the series. This got me back into reading because I had a major slump going on. But at the same time, I still am going to keep my ratings at 4.5 and then this one at 5 stars just because this was the first book. I love this. I love the magical system. I feel like I talked about this book so much since I literally just read it in 2024, but I think Stephanie Garber's writing is so nice. I want to pick up her next series, or the series after this, the Broken Hearts trilogy, and I actually really enjoyed these characters until we got into the second book, and then I didn't care much about Scarlet, but I really love the male character, and I also love the little people that you meet along the way and how the whole game or Caraval actually plays out. Like I said, I just love the world. I love the world building, and I loved how I was watching this as a movie. Per usual with my 5-star books, I feel like the majority of them, I feel things more than when I'm actually enjoying as reading, if that makes sense. This book was a great introduction to her writing. Next, I have Beautiful Redemption. This is the 4th and final book of the Beautiful Creature series. I actually really enjoyed this series. It's a YA fantasy. I just really love the last one. Even though I was getting annoyed to a point where I was like, okay, I'm glad we only have 4 books. We need to wrap up this series. I feel like it was dragging out just a little bit too much. This book was so much different than the other ones. I felt like it was written a little bit better. I feel like the events and the struggles in this book were much more interesting and entertaining to me. And then, of course, I thought this was a perfect resolution to the series. I highly recommend this because it's YA and fantasy, and it's just one of those that I guess was popular in 2011, 2013, but it's not necessarily popular now. And I see them every once in a while in thrift stores now that I've finished the series, but before I had never seen this, and it took me forever to find this his 4th and final book. I would still say that this is a 5-star read. I just don't think I would ever want to go back and read the series, if that makes sense. Oh boy, if I had an hour or so to talk about this book. Betrayal by Brianna E. Wilson. This is somebody who I know, her first published book. This book, I'm not gonna lie, I was not expecting it to be so good, and I was so intrigued this entire time reading this book. I could not put this down. I binged this book for the most part. It's a fantasy, like a romantasy. I guess it's in a way based off of Game of Thrones, or has elements of Game of Thrones and then some other stories. I don't know. I love this cliffhanger at the end. It's like a subtle one that you kind of use your brain to figure out, or you can use your brain to be like, oh, wait a minute. Like, it's like a little trick one, and it's so good. And she's coming out with her second one, which is Thrones of Wing and Ash, and I am so excited to read that book. This book was just honestly so good. I feel like I can't say enough about it, to be honest, and I feel like also every time I talk about it, I just ramble on about so many things because I just want people to know and to read this book. I want everybody to go out and buy it, show her some support or love, and just read it, because it was really something that I just wasn't expecting to be so good, and it was my favorite book of 2024. But I also don't want to necessarily hype it up. I don't want to say all that, because if I hype it up, I don't want you to read it and then think of it as bad because of me. So just know I found it very interesting. I love the whole concept. I love her world. I love the characters in it, and I like the major like plot and war that's going on. And then also, like I said, that cliffhanger and the male main character, I did not like at first. I'm not gonna lie. This was my first, I think, introduction to almost like a enemies to lovers, and the way that I was rooting for him at the end, and I was really agreeing with him, and then something happened and I'm like, hold up, don't do this to me. I don't want him to maybe be a bad person, or I don't want him to maybe do this. Like, I'm so scared. I just need the second book so I can read what happens, to be honest. Then I have All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. I love this book. Again, historical fiction, relative around the war. We have 2 POVs, same timeline. We have a blind daughter, and then we also have, I can't remember how old he is. I think he's like 18, and he gets selected to go basically into the war. I don't remember the entire thing for him as much as her, because I feel like we were following the daughter much more than we were him. But the ending of this book, the way I felt like my emotions during this book, I was so excited, I was so sad, I was so happy. There were moments where I was so scared in a way, like it was tense. I don't know. I just had such a great time reading this, and I was definitely there. I felt like in the war, or there during when things were happening, and especially when we were reading the blind daughter's point of view, I felt like in a way I was picturing it all, but also I was picturing it as her, where I also couldn't see, which is a little bit weird, but it kind of makes sense in my mind. I highly recommend this book. I loved it. It did take me, I think, like 50 or 100 pages to get into. It was very slow for me at first, and I was adjusting to his writing, but after I got past that, it was very quick, my normal pace, and I could come back to this book and just hop right into it. I have Verity by Colleen Hoover. This was my first actual Colleen Hoover book. I'm not gonna lie, I think she does really good for like the thriller mystery, whatever you want to say. This though was one of those where, first off, black pages, never seen that before. I like it. Also, the way that the font looks, and when I was reading this, how fast paced this was, and it was bingeable. I could not put it down. I had to know what happened. Every chapter ended, and I was like, hold on, I gotta start the next chapter. And then again, another chapter ended, and I had to start the next one. I read this when we were in Huntington Beach for an air show for the Thunderbirds, and I was in the hotel room waiting on Josh to get off work. I think I read like 200 pages, to be honest. I sat there for a couple hours and binged probably over half of this book, and it was honestly very good. I don't care what your thoughts are on Colleen Hoover. I don't care what your thoughts on this book potentially are. I enjoyed it. That's my personal opinion. And I actually really loved, for the most part, how it made me feel. The letter thing kind of messed with me, because again, I was thinking, since I have a son, I had it as, no, you wouldn't write this down even if you were joking. That's how I was siding. Next, I'm actually going to talk about 3 books in a row because they're a part of a series, and I feel like they'll make sense once I hold them all up. We have the last 3 books of the Harry Potter series. We have The Order of the Phoenix, The Half-Blood Prince, and The Deathly Hallows. All 3 of these were 5 stars. These were the best conclusion to the series. I had never read the books until I think the end of 2022, 2023. I had picked these books up and I started reading them. I absolutely loved them. I always loved the movies growing up, but the books just were something I just never cared about for some reason. Even always loving books, I just never wanted to read the series. I think I'm glad that I actually read it as an adult more than reading it as they were coming up. And I remember the excitement, especially the last one, and then when they made the movies, the excitement around the series was so amazing. But I think reading it as an adult, just at the right time, at the right place, it was so perfect. The first couple are kind of kiddie-ish in a way, but once you get past the first one and the second one, which I still loved, I find the rest of the series to be so good. Harry's growing up, he's coming to age. If you know about the movies, you know about the books. I feel like the movie adaptations are probably the closest that I've ever seen seen based off of books. I've never seen some so close, and I just feel like overall this whole series was like a 4.5 star rating. I don't care how old you are, if you've never read Harry Potter or if you've never technically seen the movies, I think honestly you should try to get into Harry Potter. Definitely the first 1 to maybe 3. They might be a little bit hard to get into if you're reading them, but definitely 4 on up are the best in my opinion. They get so much better. There's so much growth in it. I feel like there's so many things about this that J.K. Rowling did really good. It's a really great recommendation. Next I have The Wish by Nicholas Sparks. I just read this as well last year. Some of his books are hit or miss. A lot of them, most of them are really good. And I had one not too long, I think before this one, that was just like a 2-star. It just wasn't my favorite. So when I hopped into this, I didn't have much hope. I had a lot of doubts, let's just say. And I hopped into this book and I absolutely loved the dual timeline. You're pretty much following the same person, but you go back. I love so many things that happen in here. I've seen so many great things and sad things about this book. I didn't necessarily find it sad, but I also felt like because I could call the ending, it all made sense to me, and I pretty much solved the whole book, or the ending of the book, probably before we even had 50 pages left. So I knew how it was going to end, and I really liked the timeline. I thought it was really cool. I knew they had to connect at some point. So I've read over 20 books from him, and I can just call his books just a little bit more now. They're really good palate cleansers for the most part. If I'm ever in like a slump, I can read one of his books, and for the most part, they're 4-star, 3-star on up. Not bad. It was just like a simple 5-star. I think looking back, it would still be a 5-star, but it's one of those that potentially could be like a 4.9. It's like almost there, but I don't do those ratings. I just now started doing half ratings. I would say it's more than a 4.5, but it's right on the border of 5 stars, if that makes sense. It was really good, but now that I've moved on from it, it's one that I don't think about too much. Next, I have 2 books that in theory is a duology, but there's 4 books technically in the series, and that's actually Fable and Namesake by Adrienne Young. I absolutely love this. Hopping into this book was just straight action. Immediately, the main character is like abandoned on an island, and you get to read about that, and then she has struggles. She meets people that are kind of dodgy, people that are kind of good, people that don't trust her, people that she trusts maybe a little too much. There's so many things in here that make total sense. There's so many things that I absolutely love. Technically, I would not rate one of these books without rating the other one, just because I think in my head, especially when I look back, they're just one entire book. You pretty much just morph them together. Like I said, she wrote a book and then she just split it down the middle, because when you hop into Namesake, you're pretty much immediately taking off right where you left off from the first book. Both of these were just so intriguing for a YA fantasy. Not necessarily a pirate, but this world placement, I felt like I really hopped into this and absolutely loved it, and I longed to be in this world for some reason. I just felt like I wanted to have my little moment in this world, and then when I finished the series, I was really sad. I even had to go buy more books from her because I wanted more of this world, if that makes sense. I felt like she did a really good job describing it without being so descriptive that you're lost as you're reading. It was really nice world building, really nice characters. For the most part, easy writing since it's YA, but I don't know. I just really love this series. I definitely recommend it. The covers are beautiful. I really love, sorry, that's the wrong way. I really love how Saint looks, which is her father. I really love her other series, Sky in the Deep, and also The Girl That the Sea Gave Back. That duology was really good, but this one I think was almost one of my favorites. Sky in the Deep I think was a little bit better than these, but I did not rate it 5 stars. These definitely would still be 5 stars though, in my personal opinion. Another good book, this is a military style book. I'm sorry, if you know me, you know how I am. This is also an author that I technically didn't know, but my husband's family knew, and it's John A. Burkall's A Pink Mist. I absolutely love this book. It is basically him telling his stories about him during the Vietnam War, and there's so much about this that I loved. First off, I love when you self-publish books because the font is big, the white paper, it's so white and crispy, except for in the sun. I don't like that. I love how the font looks. I love how, like, when you print maps and stuff, it looks like you printed it off a computer. I don't know. The way that this book felt when reading it too, physically, and then as I was reading it, how it looked, I loved it. And the things that he went through, I've been thinking about rereading this book so much because it just not necessarily affected me in a bad way. It just really stuck with me, and I absolutely love it. I would highly recommend this book. I think actually everybody needs every now and then to read more of like the history stuff or even the military stuff. Get a little bit of insight on how things work with us in the US especially, but also because there are some things that if you're just a normal civilian, you don't understand unless you read these books. And for this book in particular, if you know about how us Americans treated Vietnam vets when they first came home, this book kind of dives into that just a little bit when he comes home, and it's really sad and heartbreaking, and there's just some things that it's very frustrating as being in like a younger generation and not really actually there at the time, but it's really nice because you have the history. We have all of this knowledge that that we can easily get to either on our phones or through books, and some people just avoid it or they're oblivious to it. And I think honestly we need to read more of these books. I have a really great time reading these. I'm not a big memoir person too much, but if it's a memoir or an autobiography or something revolving around the military, like Chris Kyle's American Sniper, I'm gonna pick that up. I love those types of books. I don't know why, just the military style. It's definitely one that I will always gravitate to, and when I find them in thrift stores, I love to pick them up. But this book in particular, I highly recommend. I still think it's 5 stars, and like I said, I've just been thinking about going back and rereading it. Next, I have 2 books from a series again. This is my last one where I'm pairing them up. You already know. I have Airborn and Skybreaker by Kenneth Opel. I read Airborn in 2019, I do believe, and then just a couple years ago in Vegas when I was thrifting, I seen this in a hardback, and sitting next to it was the second in the series. I never even knew there was a series, so technically it was a trilogy and I had to go buy the last one, but these 2 books were 5-star reads. I love the first one. Looking back, yes, it's still 5-star. I think it's kind of like The Wish, where it's on the border of 5 stars. It could maybe also be a 4.5, but this Skybreaker, no, this was a 5-star. I don't know if it's because I had already read Airborne, so I kind of called some things I already knew. I was recalling my memory, I guess you could say. But Skybreaker, when I hopped into this book, everything that happened in this book was so great. The movie I was watching, the emotions I was getting, I felt like I was there up in the sky. There were so many things about this series, this trilogy, that I just absolutely loved, and I highly recommend this. This is a YA sci-fi series, and all 3 books are their own version for the most part. Like, you could technically read them by themselves. I wouldn't recommend that, but each book has its own major plot, major event that happens. They kind of talk about, like for the second and the third book, they kind of talk about the previous books, but for the most part, they're their own story, and I just absolutely enjoyed it. This was such a great read, both in 2019 and then years later in 2024, the end of 2024 actually. And it's one of those as well that I thrifted, and I thrifted a large print of this book at first, and I loved it because it was so big and I felt like I was flying through that book. And it was also one that I never heard anybody talk about, so I felt like me finding a 5-star read on my own was much more rewarding. Then we have Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. I read this, I don't know how many years ago now. I think it might have been when we were stationed in Wisconsin and not when we were stationed in Vegas. Either way, again, a military type story. I think there's a movie as well. I've never seen the movie, I don't think, but this book was so good. I see it all the time in thrift stores, especially now. These main characters being stranded in the ocean, and one of the things that really stuck with me with this book is our main character. He wasn't necessarily religious, but he did pray to God, and he's like, hey, if you basically get me off this boat, because they had been stuck for I don't know how many months on the Pacific Ocean, he's like, if you get me out of here, I promise that I will spend my life devoted to you. I will always turn to you. I will never doubt you. I will never be a disbeliever. I will always believe in you. I will always follow you, and I will try to do better. And let's just say I love the religious part of this at the end of the book. I'm not gonna lie. The pictures were really good too. I just felt like all of these inspirational military style books were just so good, so inspiring to hear about how you could literally hit rock bottom or literally be so close to death and have tragic events happen to you. A lot of the time, most people turn to God, and just how God saves people, and some other things if you're not religious, just some things that no matter where you're at, if you think you're at your lowest, yeah, maybe you could go lower, but at the same time, the only place left to go is up. And the reward sometimes of just trying to stay alive, or just trying to keep your mind from going crazy in this type of situation, it was so in a way inspiring, because I think I would have lost it. I don't know how some of these people do what they did, because in theory, I never thought about how when you don't have socialization for so long, your mind starts going crazy. I mean, I've watched Castaway, so I know of that, but at the same time, it's one that it's not something that I think I would have thought about too much. So him trying to remember all of his memories and recite them to himself day after day after day to make sure that he knew his mind was going to stay sharp is something that I thought was really interesting, and also very intriguing to learn about or to hear about, and how also it affected him on the boat. And there were some other things about this story that I really loved, and I really want to see the movie if there is a movie. I do believe there is a movie. I don't know. I highly recommend this one as well. Next, I have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is my first and only book that I've read from V.E. Schwab. I absolutely love this book. This is still a 5-star read. The timelines, I love the dates. I love the things that Addie goes through. I love not that she made a deal with the devil. I don't like that part, but I like how she overcame it. I like her struggles. I like how this book was written. I liked everything about this book. I was so intrigued the entire time. I soft DNF'd it so many years ago because I was like, okay, I'm just not feeling it. It's like 75 pages into it and I just felt like it was slow. I don't know why I ever thought that. It went so fast the second time. I enjoyed it. I know you guys have probably heard about this this book or maybe even read it yourselves. And if you haven't though, I highly recommend it. I feel like it is hyped for a reason. Next, I have The Gold of Exodus, and this is by Howard Blum. This is about the findings of the true Mount Sinai. This is a Christian related book. I love this book. This was so interesting. I read this, I think we were definitely stationed in Wisconsin because I would read it on the ramp a lot, and then I think also when I was pregnant, and so I had to be at the station instead of around the airplanes. And this was just so interesting. I lent this to my mom to read. I don't know if she liked it as much as me, to be honest, but I found this with the science backing up the Christian. That is what's interesting to me. And also the fact of everybody thinks Mount Sinai is here, but in reality he has proof, multiple different proof, that it's over here. And it was just one of those that just kind of messes with your mind. Like, it makes you think about it and then kind of do your own research a little bit. It's one of those where you can see where some science has backed up Christianity. And it's just one of those great feelings if you're Christian, because everybody's always like, believe science, believe this. But at the same time, when you believe in God, you want to believe in God. And it's really nice when both of those back each other up. I thought it was so intriguing. I like this guy's story. I like the things that happened. A little bit of like adventure and suspense in a way, because this is a very guarded area over in an area that, or in a country that you cannot just walk around. They will either kill you or imprison you. It's not like America. America, you're very free here. You can do whatever you want basically and not get killed. You do one thing wrong, you step over a line and you're trespassing like these people were, and they almost got caught, they would have been killed. There was no questions asked. They would have just been shot right on the spot. So it's one of those two that it's very tense at some spots because they're doing things that could literally get them killed, but they're doing it to try, or the main character, I can't remember how many characters are in this. I think it's mainly just the main character, but he's doing it mainly to prove about the location of Mount Sinai or to figure it out. So if you're Christian, I highly recommend this book, or if you're just kind of curious about it, I've recommended it as well. I still think this is 5 stars. And finally, the book that I just finished, I think 2 weeks ago or so, I have Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Yes, this is 5 stars. I agree with all the hype. I love the world. I love the characters. I love the friendships. I love the little love interest, I guess you could say, at the end. I love the military style book. I love the fantasy elements of it. I love the dragons. There is so much about this. I just posted my reading vlog for this yesterday. I absolutely loved filming that. I felt like I just had so much fun. It was so intriguing, and I love documenting it because there were some times when I was recording that some things happened that I was not expecting. There were some sad moments towards the ends. There were some things that I guessed that if you could watch the spoilers you could see, and there were some other things that I just was totally blindsided by. I absolutely love this book. I'm so excited to continue it. Of course, since I just read it, I'm still gonna mark it as 5 stars. I highly recommend it, and I also think it's kind of worth the hype that went around it. Maybe not to the extent that it did, but definitely it's worth a little bit of the hype. That is all of my 5-star reads. I feel like I kind of rambled about some books and maybe didn't talk as much about other books. I hope you guys all enjoyed this video, and I also hope you got a couple of recommendations and maybe even was introduced into a couple books that you've never heard of or never seen before. I feel like eventually I need to do more recommendation videos. I had so much fun a couple years ago doing a YA recommendations video, and I feel like I have Christian books, maybe military books, mystery books, fantasy books that I really want to just sit down and make a video about, saying which ones I recommended and why. Let me know down in the comments if you guys think that's a good video idea, or if you guys are curious and want to see a specific genre. But thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope to see you in another video here on my channel, and God bless.